action of NASCAR on NBC with the NBC Sports app. Get closer with alternate camera angles, driver stats, and track information specific to whichever track that NASCAR is visiting. It just happens to be this, the World Center of Racing. We visit this weekend on this 4th of July weekend and seeing a patriotic paint scheme for the Napa number 24. Chase Elliott out on the track, and I mentioned as we were going away to break that there have been 3 first-time winners. That list does not include Chase Elliott. Now it has become another question of when. Not if, but when will Chase Elliott get that first win?
We all keep waiting. There's no question. This car has qualified exceptionally well. A lot of poles at Daytona and Talladega on this 24 car. Great news for Chase Elliott this week. They announced a long-term contract extension with Hendrick Motorsports. So Rick Hendrick doing a wise thing, locking up Chase Elliott. You can definitely build around Chase Elliott. People want to work for him. You can recruit the best crew members, the best tire changers. You can recruit around Chase Elliott. Great move by Hendrick Motorsports to lock him up.
And they also mentioned earlier in the year Jimmy Johnson is going to be back. They said that he will race again for a few more seasons. So that's a great nucleus to build around. I mean, when you have Jimmy Johnson, obviously could end up being one of the greatest, if not the greatest of all time in NASCAR, and then a young driver like Chase Elliott, who you know is going to be able to mature into another great driver in NASCAR. You've got a wonderful nucleus around just those 2 drivers alone.
And you mentioned the 24 and how well he has qualified. So it may not look it because we've had a bunch of cars go out there as groups, but if you look at timing and scoring and go to the cars that have only run 1 lap at a time, Trevor Bayne ran a 47.45 and Elliott also ran a 47.45. So of all the cars we've seen make single car runs, he has speed at this point that looks like it could sit on the front row, but that's a pretty small sample set. We've only had about 8 or 10 cars run by themselves.
Michael McDowell back out on the track. He was trying to stay with that group of the Hendrick cars that were running earlier, but now he's out there on his own. Parker?
Yes, Rick, and that was part of the problem for the 95. They were able to run in that draft group and get that big lap time, put him second on the board. But as he tried to make moves, and Steve, you can go into this a little bit, what you're doing in practice, he tried to make a move by himself to test the speed of that race car. But when he did, he had no help. He lost that pack. So they know on this team, and talking to them, they just don't have the speed to make those kind of moves. They went out back again, trying to do some single car runs now to work on some things and try to find a little bit of that missing speed. Because as you know, especially in these races, the way this package is, if you don't have that speed to make moves, you're just going to be along for the ride with the draft pack and not able to make the moves you want to get to the run.
I understand that, Parker, but I actually think sometimes it's good to know in practice you don't have that speed, not because you can go find it. But, Jeff, as a race car driver, I know as a crew chief, if I know that this 95 car can't keep up and I'm the crew chief of this car, I'm going to be taking 2 tires under green flag pit stops. I'm going to be making sure we kind of stay in the pack, not risking being at the back. As a race car driver, surely you race differently.
You race 100% differently. You put yourself in a position where you're never the last car in line. Do everything in your power to keep that from happening. But it's also, Parker mentioned it, you try to force the tempo. You try these drafts. You want a car that you can be aggressive with. If you don't have that car, then you can't be. And the more you try to be and the more moves you make, the further back you go. So understanding that your car doesn't have speed means, okay, I got to stay in line. I can't force that issue. I got to pick a line that hopefully is going to work, and the other line, the outside, let's say I want the inside. The outside isn't going to work. I get my way to the front just because people make mistakes and get in the wrong line. Don't try to force the tempo with a slow race car.
Marty, there's a rumor you've caught up with a Daytona 500 champion.
That'd be Mr. Jamie McMurray, who not only is fit right now, Rick, because he's doing all this bicycle riding, he's evidently grown about 6 inches. All that helps to be on the scales, doesn't it?
Tall scale pads make a big difference, yes.
Yeah. Yes, it does. All right, so let's talk about, you were one of the cars that ran this session. What were you trying to learn in this session?
So we went out and just did a mock qualifying run. Not that we really needed to, but like I was telling you, we've missed it on our travels a couple of times with the plate races. And even though we all say we don't care where we qualify, we actually all do kind of care where we qualify. You want to do the best you can. And so when you go out and you do that, I don't know that dragging makes a huge difference, but it does make a little bit. So we just kind of did a simulated qualifying run there, and not as much worried about the time as just making sure that the car didn't drag.
So you were an advocate of actually not running in packs in this session. Is it a fear that something might happen? What is that?
Well, I mean, look, they spend, I say we, I'm going to say the team has spent weeks building this car, and then between Sonoma and here, you spend hours a day polishing and just doing every little trick you can. And if you have to get the backup car out, it hasn't had any of that done to it. So there's just not a lot to gain by going out and drafting, and there's a whole lot to lose. It would be fun to go out and be able to draft and kind of get acclimated, because when you don't draft at all, then they drop the green flag on Saturday night. It's a little awkward for a while because you have to get used to that again. But after 4 or 5 laps, it kind of seems normal.
By the way, a lot of people picking you to win Saturday night because you've been so aggressive on the plate races.
That's interesting. Yeah, I think I told you this at the break. In the 500, I was maybe a little too aggressive, and I got myself in trouble. But you have to be pretty aggressive, because if you don't, you end up falling to the back. There's been numerous times that they've said we're going to pit in 4 or 5 laps, and you decide just to kind of ride in a lane, and sometimes you fall back 5 rows or 6 rows, and it might take 30 laps to get all that back. The days of riding in the back and then just deciding to go to the front when you want to are over. You have to race literally every single lap, and now that we have the stage points, you work really hard to get those.
There you go, and Jeff, that's what you've talked about, being aggressive at these plate races, but Jamie's saying there's a little bit of a balance there. Maybe in the 500 he was a little too aggressive when we were here in February.
Well, Marty, there's always a balance. There's no question, but he is 100% right. If you're not aggressive in these races today, you're not going to win them. You have to be aggressive. You have to, we talked about earlier, you have to force that tempo and put your car in positions you wouldn't normally do, because if you just sit there and ride, you just go further back with a fast race car. So Jamie Murray and his team have a fast race car. He had one at the Daytona 500. He got a little bit over aggressive, but you have to be aggressive if you're going to win.
Jimmy Johnson, 7-time champion. Getting a little advice there from an engineer.